Hi, I'm Dr. Aashna Naik and welcome to my YouTube channel Enamelo, here to make dentistry a little easier to understand and a lot more interesting. Before we begin, you could check out the description for a timeline to guide you through the video, and a Google form is available to self-assess how well you have understood the topic.
Today's topic is line and point angles. A line angle is formed when two surfaces meet, and a point angle is formed by the junction or the union of three surfaces. To understand this better, let's take a tooth model. This is a model of upper central incisor. An anterior tooth has 6 line angles and 4 point angles. So let's start by naming all the surfaces: the labial, the mesial, the lingual, the distal, and the incisal edge. The line angle that exists between the mesial and the labial surface is known as the mesiolabial line angle. This is the mesiolingual line angle. This is the distal surface. So the line angle that exists between the distal and the lingual surface is known as the distolingual line angle. This line angle is known as the distolabial line angle. The line angle that is formed between the labial surface and the incisal edge is known as the labio-incisal line angle. And the line angle that forms between the lingual and the incisal edge is known as the lingo-incisal line angle. Now let's look at point angles. Point angles are formed by the union or the junction of three surfaces. So on an anterior tooth, the point angle formed between the mesial, labial, and incisal edge is known as the mesiolabial incisal point angle. Not to be too overwhelmed by it, but we're just going to point out these point angles. The point angle formed between the mesial, lingual, and the incisal edge is known as the mesiolingual incisal point angle. Similarly, this is the disto-labio-incisal point angle, and this is the disto-lingo-incisal point angle. Let's look at cavity preps and its terminologies. A cavo-surface margin is a junction where the prepared tooth surface meets the original tooth surface, or the boundary line between the cavity and the surrounding tooth structure. A cavo-surface angle is an angle formed at the junction of the prepared tooth structure and the external surface of the tooth. It is a critical factor in the success of dental restorations, influencing marginal integrity and the overall strength of the restoration. Now, let's look at some various cavity preps and name all line and point angles. This is an image of a Class 1 cavity prep, and this is a simple model of a Class 1 cavity to make things a little easier to understand. A quick concept of what are external and internal walls. External walls are the prepared surfaces of the tooth that extend to the external surface of the tooth. For example, the labial wall, the lingual wall, the mesial wall, and the distal wall. Internal walls are those surfaces of the tooth that don't extend to the external surface of the tooth. For example, the pulpal wall and the axial wall. Now that we have named all the surfaces of this cavity prep, it's going to be easier to name all the line and point angles. In a Class 1, we can see that there are 8 line angles and 4 point angles. So let's name them. The line angle between the buccal and the pulpal wall is known as the bucco-pulpal line angle. Similarly, let's name the other 3: mesio-pulpal line angle, lingo-pulpal line angle, and the disto-pulpal line angle. The line angle that exists between the distal wall and the buccal wall is known as the disto-buccal line angle. Similarly, we have the mesio-buccal line angle, the mesio-lingual line angle, and the disto-lingual line angle. Now, in this cavity, a Class 1 cavity, we can see 4 point angles, and the point angles are disto-bucco-pulpal point angle because it exists between the distal, buccal, and the pulpal wall. Similarly, we can see the mesio-bucco-pulpal point angle, the mesio-lingual pulpal point angle, and the disto-lingo-pulpal point angle. Now, if we would consider a Class 5 cavity, we have the same number of point and line angles as a Class 1 cavity because the shape is more or less the same, but the walls change. So, this is the incisal wall, this is the axial wall, this is the mesial, the distal, and the gingival wall. So, let's name all the line angles in this Class 5 cavity. This is the axo-incisal line angle, this is the axo-mesial line angle, this is the axo-gingival line angle, and this is the axo-distal line angle. This is known as the mesio-incisal line angle, disto-incisal line angle, the mesio-gingival line angle, and the disto-gingival line angle. Coming to the point angles, we have the axio-mesio-incisal point angle, the axo-disto-incisal point angle, the axo-mesio-gingival point angle, and the axo-disto-gingival point angle. Now let us look at a Class 2 cavity prep. This wall is the distal wall, the buccal wall, the lingual wall, the pulpal floor. This wall that is parallel to the long axis of the tooth is known as the axial wall. And this floor that is perpendicular to the long axis of the tooth is known as the gingival floor. The line angle that is formed by the meeting of the pulpal floor and the axial wall is known as the axopulpal line angle. The line angle formed by the axial wall and the gingival floor is known as the axogingival line angle. Now, let's try to name all the point angles of a class 2 cavity prep. This point angle formed by the meeting of the distal, buccal and pulpal floor is known as the disto-bucco-pulpal point angle. Similarly, this point angle is known as the disto-lingo-pulpal point angle. This is known as the axio-bucco-pulpal point angle, and this one is known as the axio-lingo-pulpal point angle. Coming down to this point, this is known as the axo-bucco-gingival point angle, and this point, axo-lingo-gingival point angle. Since a class 4 cavity prep is quite similar to a class 2 cavity prep, so much so even the walls are named the same, I will not be naming all the line and point angles of a class 4 cavity prep for this video. Let's start looking at our final cavity prep, the class 3. The class 3 has 4 walls: the facial, the lingual, the gingival floor, and the axial wall. It has 6 line angles and 3 point angles. The line angles are the incisal line angle, the axiolingual line angle, the lingogingival line angle, the axiogingival line angle, the faciogingival line angle, and the axofacial line angle. Coming to the point angles, this one is the axo-incisal point angle, this one is the axo-lingogingival point angle, and lastly, the axo-faciogingival point angle. Now that we have seen and named all the different types of line and point angles in each cavity prep, this is a summary table of the number of line and point angles in each cavity prep. Hope you found this short topic easy to understand. Don't forget to check out the Google form to see if you can get a perfect score. Let me know in the comment section below what are the other topics you'd like me to cover in the upcoming videos. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please do like, share and subscribe.